Israel-Hamas live updates, IDF in Gaza City, Benjamin Netanyahu vows indefinite control, G7 to call for humanitarian pause. We're sorry, this feature is currently unavailable. We're working to restore it. Please try again later. The Sydney Morning Herald. The Sydney Morning Herald. Sections. Network. Advertisement. World. Middle East. Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Israel-Hamas conflict as it happened, IDF fighting in the depths as Netanyahu foreshadows indefinite control of Gaza. By James Lemon, Ben Cubby and Lucy Cormack. Save articles for later. Add articles to your saved list and come back to them anytime. Key posts. 8:31 p.m. recapping today's news. 7:55 p.m. 50,000 Gazans fled south on Wednesday, Israel. 6:21 p.m. today's headlines at a glance. 5:06 p.m. talks underway for 3-day ceasefire. 4:29 p.m. street battles rage in Gaza City. 2:58 p.m. combat engineers blow up tunnels under Gaza. 2:39 p.m. Hamas attack to put Palestinian cause back on the table. 10:35 Ammuz bombs Iran-linked facility in Syria. Latest posts. Recapping today's news. By Lucy Cormack. That brings today's live coverage of the Israel-Hamas war to a close. If you're just catching up, a quick look back at today's headlines. Negotiations are reportedly underway for a 3-day humanitarian ceasefire in Gaza in exchange for the release of about a dozen hostages held by Hamas. Israeli combat engineers were using explosive devices to destroy a Hamas tunnel network that stretches for hundreds of kilometers beneath Gaza. About 130 tunnels had been blown up so far, Israel said on Wednesday. Palestinian officials said 10,569 people had been killed as of Wednesday, 40% of them children. Israel says 33 of its soldiers have been killed, Reuters reported. The UN human rights chief says Gaza is becoming a graveyard for children, and the death toll shows that something is wrong with the Israeli campaign. The number of Palestinian civilians fleeing the north has dramatically accelerated, with estimates that 50,000 headed south on Wednesday, facing dire humanitarian conditions. Some 80 countries and organizations met in Paris to coordinate humanitarian aid and find ways to help wounded civilians escape the siege. The US has pushed back against Israel's desire to reoccupy the Gaza Strip once the war is over, with Secretary of State Anthony Blinken saying neither Hamas nor Israel should control the enclave. Thank you for staying with us. I'm Lucy Cormack. Good night. 50,000 Gazans fled south on Wednesday, Israel. It is almost 11 a.m. in Gaza, where a corridor from the north to the south of Wadi Gaza has been opened to desperate Palestinians fleeing increasing violence for about an hour. Israel says about 50,000 residents of the northern Gaza Strip headed south of Wadi Gaza on Wednesday as the military intensified its ground offensive and relentless bombardment of the enclave. The figure has not been independently verified. In a statement posted in the past hour, IDF spokesman Avichai Adrai said the working hours of the road from Salah al-Din Street towards the south of Wadi Gaza had been extended, to run from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. Israel has called the route a safe road. Do not listen to what some Hamas leaders say from their hotels abroad or from the underground places they have arranged for themselves and their family members, an English translation of the statement published in Arabic said. The northern Gaza Strip area is considered a fierce combat zone and time is running out to evacuate it. Hamas officials have lashed out at the growing exodus of Palestinian refugees fleeing the enclave's north on foot, calling it forced displacement. More than 1.5 million people, or about 70% of Gaza's population, have been forced from their homes since the war began. IDF says weapons found in children's bedroom. By Lucy Cormack. The Israel Defense Forces has published images of an alleged Hamas weapons production and storage facility housed in a residential building, near a children's bedroom. In an update posted to the social media app Telegram, the IDF said soldiers discovered the weapons manufacturing and storage area in northern Gaza. An Israeli soldier inside a children's bedroom in northern Gaza, where the IDF says it found weapons. Credit, IDF. IDF soldiers discovered a Hamas weapons manufacturing and storage facility used to produce and store UAVs and weapons. The site was located in a residential building, in close proximity to schools in the center of the Sheikh Radwan neighborhood in northern Gaza. The statement claimed Hamas explosives and operational plans were also found next to a children's bedroom. The IDF claimed weapons and explosives were found, along with Hamas plans. Credit, IDF. Advertisement. South Korea and US align on calls for humanitarian pause. South Korea's Foreign Minister Park Jin has said the country is monitoring possible connections between North Korea and Hamas in remarks following a meeting with US Secretary of State Anthony Blinken. The pair met for talks, along with President Yoon Suk-yeol, during Blinken's visit to South Korea on Thursday. The two nations shared the view that there is a need for humanitarian pauses in the Israel-Hamas war. US Secretary of State Anthony Blinken traveled to Seoul following a G7 foreign ministers meeting in Japan. Credit, Getty. The U.S. State Department said the leadership group also discussed the growing threat posed by North Korea and its alleged provision of military equipment to Russia to help it wage war on Ukraine. They also spoke of US-South Korea cooperation and its role in responding to global challenges, including China's assertiveness and the instability in the Middle East. Speaking after his meeting with Blinken in Seoul, Park said the two countries condemned Hamas' attack against civilians and were monitoring possible North Korea's connection with the Palestinian-designated terrorist group. Both nations vowed to continue supporting Ukraine against Russia's invasion and to boost humanitarian aid to Palestinian civilians in Gaza. With Reuters. Today's headlines at a glance. Thank you for joining our live coverage of the Hamas-Israel war today. I'm Ben Cubby and I'm now handing over to my colleague Lucy Cormack as coverage continues. Here are today's main headlines at a glance. Gun battles are being fought near the center of Gaza City, and Israeli combat engineers claim to have blown up 130 tunnels that were being used by Hamas fighters. Talks are reportedly underway for a 3-day ceasefire that could see a dozen hostages released by Hamas and food and fuel allowed into Gaza. The UN human rights chief says Gaza is becoming a graveyard for children, and the death toll shows that something is wrong with the Israeli campaign. The US bombed an Iran-linked facility in Syria, and Yemen shot down a US surveillance drone. 2 men have been arrested for an alleged terror plot in Brazil planned by Hezbollah. The US has pushed back against Israel's desire to reoccupy the Gaza Strip once the war is over, with Secretary of State Anthony Blinken saying neither Hamas nor Israel should control the enclave. Palestinians use animal-drawn carts to travel during a fuel shortage in Khan Yunis, in southern Gaza. Credit, Samar Abu Eluf, The New York Times. IDF says Hamas stronghold captured after 10-hour battle. Israeli troops have captured a Hamas stronghold known as Outpost 17 in the Jabalia refugee camp after a 10-hour battle, the Israeli Defense Force said. The IDF said the soldiers fought Hamas and Islamic Jihad operatives in the stronghold, who were both above ground and in an underground route in the area, the Times of Israel reported. The Israeli military said troops located many weapons and uncovered tunnel shafts, including one located adjacent to a kindergarten that led to an extensive underground route. Troops from Israel's Nahal Infantry Brigade also found significant Hamas battle plans in Outpost 17, the IDF said. It said dozens of Palestinian fighters were killed in the battle but did not provide any new information about Israeli casualties. Advertisement. Truce deal would allow Red Cross to visit hostages. More detail is emerging on the proposed truce deal, which would see a limited number of hostages released by Hamas in exchange for a 3-day pause in fighting. Under the ceasefire plan, Hamas would release a dozen civilian hostages, most of them foreign passport holders, and provide a complete list of hostages to mediators, according to officials who spoke to Associated Press on condition of anonymity. Palestinians line up at a bakery in Khan Yunis, in the southern Gaza Strip. Credit, Samar Abu Eluf, New York Times. The International Committee of the Red Cross would be allowed to visit the hostages, the officials said. A 3-day ceasefire would allow the delivery of humanitarian aid across Gaza, including the northern area, the focus of Israel's military campaign to crush the territory's Hamas rulers. Under the proposed deal, some fuel would also enter Gaza for the first time since the start of the war, to be distributed to hospitals and bakeries under UN supervision. Israel has barred fuel shipments to Gaza since the start of the war, arguing Hamas would divert them for military use. Over the past month, only limited amounts of aid, such as medicine, food and water, have entered Gaza. Aid workers say it's not nearly enough to meet mounting needs. Talks underway for 3-day ceasefire. Negotiations are underway to reach a 3-day humanitarian ceasefire in Gaza in exchange for the release of about a dozen hostages held by Hamas, according to 2 officials from Egypt, one from the United Nations and a Western diplomat, who spoke on condition of anonymity to discuss sensitive diplomatic efforts. The deal would enable more aid, including limited amounts of fuel, to enter the besieged territory to alleviate worsening conditions for the 2.3 million Palestinians trapped there. It is being brokered by Qatar, Egypt and the US, according to the officials and the diplomat. One of the Egyptian officials says details of the deal were discussed this week in Cairo with the visiting CIA chief and an Israeli delegation. The official said mediators are finalizing a draft deal. A senior US official said the Biden administration has not put forward any specific time frame for a pause in Israel's military operations but has suggested that Israel consider tying the length of a pause to the release of a certain number of hostages. If an agreement on the duration of the pause and the number of hostages to be freed can be reached and the deal successfully implemented, the same formula could be revisited for additional pauses and releases, according to the official. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has said any temporary ceasefire would have to be accompanied by the release of the hostages who were seized by Hamas during the militant group's October 7 assault on southern Israel. Israel has said around 240 hostages, both Israelis and those with foreign passports, are currently held in Gaza. An earlier report in the New York Times said Israel and Hamas have been negotiating for the release of as many as 15 hostages in exchange for a brief suspension in the Israeli military operation in the Gaza Strip. Street battles rage in Gaza City. Street battles raged in Gaza City with Hamas fighters using tunnels to ambush Israeli forces, who had advanced close to the center of the enclave's main urban area. Video released by the Israeli military shows combat engineers uncovering tunnel entrances and blowing some of them up with explosives. About 130 tunnels had been blown up so far, Israel said on Wednesday. A separate video released by Hamas on Wednesday appears to show intense street battles alongside bombed-out buildings in Gaza City. Israeli tanks have met heavy resistance from Hamas fighters using underground tunnels to stage ambushes, according to sources with Iran-backed Hamas and the separate Islamic Jihad militant group. One clip from the Hamas video released on Wednesday showed fighters running past piles of debris and stopping to fire shoulder-propelled missiles at Israeli tanks. Another showed them shooting rifles from perches behind buildings and dumpsters. The footage could not be authenticated. The terrorist organization claimed to have been inflicting heavy losses. Israel said one soldier, combat engineer Sergeant Eliyahu El-Makaz, was killed in Gaza on Wednesday, bringing the Israeli military death toll to 34 since the ground incursion began. Agencies. Advertisement. Paris conference to coordinate help for Gaza wounded. Some 80 countries and international organizations meet in Paris on Thursday to coordinate aid and assess how to help the wounded in Gaza, although expectations for concrete results are low without some pause in fighting. France offered support for Israel after a deadly October 7 attack by Hamas, yet Israel's retaliatory bombardment has raised concerns as civilian casualties have soared. Thousands have been killed, wounded and displaced in Gaza. It's not a secret for anybody that access is difficult today in Gaza for basic necessities, medicines, water. So the object is really to work with all the participants and also with Israel, to allow improved access, a French presidential official told reporters ahead of the conference. The Palestinian Authority's prime minister will be present, but Israel was not invited. French officials said Israel was being kept informed of developments. The conference brings together regional stakeholders such as Egypt, Jordan and the Gulf Arab countries as well as Western powers and G20 members except for Russia. International institutions and non-governmental organizations, NGOs, operating in Gaza, such as Doctors Without Borders, are also due to attend. Reuters. Most viewed in world. Advertisement. The Sydney Morning Herald. Twitter. Facebook. Instagram. RSS. Copyright 2023.